he hurt you. Perhaps he betrayed you, devalued you, ignored you, made you feel like you were nothing. And in that moment, everything inside you screams, tell him. Explain how wrong he is. Make him realize what he lost. But stop, because that's exactly what he is expecting. He's prepared for tears, accusations, and anger, as it only reinforces his illusion of control. But there is one scenario for which he is completely unprepared. Your silence. Not icy or angry, but a conscious, mature silence of a woman who no longer needs to prove, explain, or fight. A man may feel he has power over you as long as you react. Any emotion, even anger, is a connection. He might leave, but if you call him back, he remains on a pedestal. When you remove yourself from this equation, without shouting, pain, or even a hint of drama, that's when something he cannot control begins in his mind. Silence provides no answers, prompting him to seek them within himself, which is terrifying because, for the first time, he is forced to confront his own behavior, rather than justify yours. This is the moment when a man meets his own shadow, not through your words, but through their absence. Carl Jung said that real change begins in silence when a person is alone with themselves. Silence reveals what he has long hidden, a fear of being nothing, losing power, realizing he is not what he claimed to be. And now imagine if you not only remain silent, but also channel all your energy into yourself, not for him, but for you. Then your departure becomes an act of the greatest strength, not weakness. And a man senses this, not because you tried to prove something to him, but because he can no longer prove anything to himself. When he loses control, he loses himself. And that's what the next part is about. For the first time in a long time, he perceives silence, not as a pause between conflicts, but as the ultimate end of a game where he is no longer the main player. This silence is not passive. It is filled with your power. As you no longer give energy away, it returns to you. It's as if you are gathering what you expended to justify his actions for internal dialogues and efforts to reach a closed heart. This energy no longer dissipates into a void where it was unappreciated. It begins to nourish you, and he senses this. Even if you are silent, he instinctively feels the change. He used to be the center of your attention, feeding his ego. But now everything has changed. The center has shifted, not him anymore, but you. You have become the axis of your universe, and this is devastating for one used to being the sun, around which everything revolves. He may try to regain your attention. Perhaps he'll send a meaningless message, pretend to stumble across your profile, or try to provoke any reaction. But if you stand firmly on your inner ground, if you no longer react out of habit, his strategy collapses. He can no longer control any of your movements. And if he cannot control, he loses the principal illusion that he was indispensable. Losing your reaction, he loses power. Losing power, he loses the purpose of his game. After all, everything he did was fueled by your participation. Now, you're outside the battlefield, and he is left not as a victorious hero, but as a lone player on a ruined arena. The most haunting part is, he can't stop it, because the only way to regain influence is to access your energy again. But the door is closed, while you begin to feel not only the return of strength, but also a new direction for it. Previously, everything in your life revolved around his opinions, moods, decisions. Now, for the first time, you ask yourself, what do I want? What happens if I direct all this not toward surviving in a relationship, but for my own life, growth, inner peace? And at that moment, a breakthrough occurs. Here, the true reclaiming of power begins. Because a woman who stops being a reaction to a man becomes an action. She no longer asks, demands, or waits. She moves. She moves not away from him, but toward herself. And in this motion, there's no hysteria, no resentment, no revenge. There's just a return to her true self. Before, she gave everything: attention, time, energy, faith, tears. Now she's reassembling her inner integrity from fragments. Not because he apologized, not because recognition came, but because she no longer needs external validation to feel her worth. Women are taught that leaving is a weakness, that one must fight, forgive, prove, save. But the truth is, fighting for a relationship where you're the sole fighter destroys the soul. True strength lies not in enduring pain, but in deciding to end it. Leaving demands much more courage than staying, because staying is habitual, while leaving means challenging a system in which you've long lived on autopilot. And the man who once saw your departure as weakness suddenly realizes you didn't escape, you liberated yourself. Not from him, but from dependency, from the constant need to be heard, understood, accepted. When you leave not in hysteria, but with clarity and dignity, a special power emerges within you. One that doesn't need words. You don't explain, you don't justify. You're simply no longer where you're not respected. And this silence is not mere quietness. It's the silence of strength. Because a woman who refuses to be a victim stops being a target for someone else's manipulations. She becomes a subject who chooses where to be, whom to give her time to, whom to share herself with. This isn't running away. It's maturing. It's when you stop asking why he treated you that way and start questioning why you allowed it. And at this point, you step into a new phase, not restoring the relationship, but restoring boundaries. Now, every step you take is not about returning the past, but building the future. A future where there's no place for those who hurt, where value doesn't stem from someone else's opinion, but from your internal sense of self. You reclaim your space, physical, emotional, spiritual. A space where you are the center, not out of selfishness, but by the right of birth. The most interesting part is you no longer need his participation. You don't need his gaze to feel beautiful. You don't need his approval to be confident. You don't need his recognition to know you're worthy of love. You fill yourself. And this is the greatest transformation, because a woman who stops pouring energy into the void begins to bloom, without noise, without drama, simply quietly from within. And then begins what he is completely unprepared for. When you stop trying to return, it's the first time he begins wanting to win you back. Not because you became needed, but because you became unreachable. In this new light, his own actions begin to carry weight. For as long as you were nearby, the consequences went unnoticed. And now, he is left alone with the emptiness into which he pushed you. And in this void, unsure of how to get you back, he first asks himself, was I ever worthy of her? Now he remains in silence, where once your voice was. He looks at his phone screen, where there's not a single new message. He checks your social media, hoping for a hint that you're still thinking about him. But there's no hint. Everything that once served as proof of influence for him is gone. He no longer influences your moods, your words, your directions. And each day, this emptiness, once seemingly temporary, becomes more and more palpable. It ceases to be a pause and turns into an ending. He now lacks the emotional chaos to hide in. There are no more tears he could interpret as proof of importance, no confrontations where he could play the magnanimous role. The most unnerving is, there are no more rescue attempts, meaning there are no more excuses. All he now hears is the echo of his words, which once devalued you, and all he sees is the cold result of his actions. But on your side of this silence, you are no longer who you once were. You aren't sitting in a corner with a dimmed gaze. You're not crafting scenarios in your mind of him suddenly understanding everything. You are truly living, not to spite him, not to incite jealousy, but for yourself. You invest in yourself, in body, mind, dreams, and each day, something in you strengthens. What was once scattered under his footsteps now forms a solid foundation. You're not just recovering, you are being reborn. He might attempt to return with words, gestures, messages, memories, but you are no longer where he left you, because a woman who has realized she no longer needs external validation changes forever. You no longer react out of habit. You choose, and choice is the highest form of strength. Here begins what once seemed impossible. You forgive not him, but yourself. Forgiveness isn't a concession. It's breaking an invisible chain holding you to pain. You forgive because you no longer want to drag resentment that drains your resources. You don't welcome him back into your life. You simply set yourself free. And in this liberation, there's no weakness. It's the most mature, pure act of self-love. And he doesn't understand what's happening. He thought you would hold on, thought he could disappear and return to the same home. But the door that was once open for him is now closed, not out of anger, but from healing. And it's here he first starts to feel the weight of true loss. Because loss isn't about physical absence. It's about no longer having access to your world. This is the first step toward genuine self-reflection, if he's capable of it at all. And there he stands before a closed door, with no access. Not because you harbor bitterness, but because you have healed. You didn't just leave. You delved inward and found what he did not. Tranquility, wholeness, dignity. He can't enter, can't knock, because instinctively he feels it. Your life no longer revolves around him. There's no room for his games, justifications, half-truths. In this moment, he faces something destructive for the male ego. The absence of consequences for you and the weight of consequences for him. He once thought you'd always return. Each of your emotions only reinforced that confidence. But now, as you don't return, don't write, don't display suffering, he starts to doubt. Not just in you, but more frighteningly, in himself. Because if you moved on, if you're not shattered, not emptied, but instead shining, growing, breathing freely, then the problem wasn't you. Everything he tried to escape, what he tried to place on your shoulders, now returns to him, unfiltered, without interpretations, in pure form, as his own actions. In this moment, he begins to understand something he long hid from himself. You weren't weak, but loyal. Not clingy, but loving. Not hysterical, but wounded. But now it's too late. Now, you're not someone who listens to promises of inaction, gives second, third, or fifth chances in hopes he'll change. You're someone who finally chose herself, and this for him is a new kind of loss. Not tumultuous, not loud, not dramatic, but silent, final, and real. He can tell himself, I'll find another. But somewhere deep down, he knows no one will care that genuinely. No one will see the good in him that you did, even when he was blind to your value, because now he realizes women like you don't return. They leave forever, without a cry, without revenge. They simply vanish. And this disappearance becomes his bitterest lesson, because it leaves no hope, and you drift further away. Not physically, energetically. You no longer vibrate at the frequency of pain. You no longer attract those who can destroy you. You are now a magnet for those who feel, respect, see, because you see yourself. This shift is not external, it's internal. And internal changes are the most enduring. They don't call for approval or seek attention. They just are, like a wall through which no one can pass without permission. Now, he confronts not just your silence, but your freedom. And that's the one thing he truly cannot control. He never feared your anger. He knew how to handle it, ignore it, turn it into a joke, pretend not to hear it. But with your freedom, he has no idea what to do, because freedom leaves no hooks. It offers no barbs to latch onto. And for the first time, he feels he not only lost influence, but disappeared from your reality, as if he never existed. This is a destructive moment when the illusion of irreplaceability begins to crumble under the weight of facts. He got used to believing he was the center of your universe, that you wouldn't manage without him, that you would suffer, try to return, follow, wait. But now he sees you in a way he never did before. Not weak, not broken, not desperate, but whole, calm, confident. You're not waving at him from the past. You have stepped into the present, where he simply doesn't exist. And here, he faces the most painful question a man can ask himself. Was I really necessary for her? This question, like poison, slowly spreads within him. It corrodes what he considered stable, his ego, his convictions, his sense of value in your life. He begins to recall what he didn't notice at the time. Your kindness, patience, warmth, your eyes full of hope, your voice that knew how to forgive. Now, all this seems not just distant, but inaccessible. He recalls not out of love, but from the horror of loss, because it finally dawns on him. Everything he once considered a guarantee was never so. You are no longer his, and not because someone else took your place, but because he himself vacated it when he refused to see your value, when he played at distancing, when he caused pain, thinking he could return whenever he wanted. He can't return anymore, not because you're spiteful, but because you're no longer waiting. And in this realization, not only does his illusion of power collapse, but also his self-image. Jung wrote, "The male psyche enters a crisis when it loses the illusion of control. This is what's happening to him now. He's not just losing you. He's losing himself in your eyes. More terrifyingly, in his own, because if the woman he underestimated grew stronger without him, everything he believed about himself was a lie. Meanwhile, you keep moving, not because you need to, but because you can. Each step isn't just forward movement. It is a distance he will never cross again. And so comes silence. But it's no longer the silence following pain. It's the silence sounding within you. This is no emptiness. It is peace. You no longer wonder where he is or with whom. Don't check what he posts. Don't catch yourself waiting. There is no more inner battle, because there is no more attachment. Not because you've become callous, but because you have finally returned home to yourself. He feels it not through words, not through actions, energetically. He senses that you no longer live in an old script where he was the meaning. He's no longer the center. He no longer matters. His name no longer evokes pain. His voice no longer causes a shiver. His attempts to return provoke just one feeling: indifference. And indifference is not the absence of love. It is completion. You aren't enacting revenge or playing games. You are simply free. And that's the most devastating realization a man can face. Not that you left, but that you no longer look back. He sees that you have become the woman who not only survived betrayal, but used it as fuel for ascent. Now he might regret, could start realizing, may try to change, but you are already too far away, and he is no longer someone to whom you would open your new space. You are no longer looking for justice, as your life gains meaning not through battle, but through moving forward. You are neither a victim nor a victor. You are a woman who stepped beyond someone else's drama and became the heroine of her own story. A woman's true strength shows not in proving her worth to a man, but in ceasing to do so. Silence, leaving, peace. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of maturity, acts of self-love. And when you rise to this level, where no outside opinion defines your inner state, you lose nothing because you have already found yourself, and now you exist in a place he can never reach. And that is your quiet, yet complete, triumph.